Sunday picnics after church.
They bring their kids. They have the Oompa bands, their picnics, their athletic contests, Sunday out in Ogden Park on the north side of Chicago. They did everything together. None of these stand-up Irish saloons. Typical way for an Irishman to drink is to go to the saloon, order a whiskey, and stand there till he's perpendicularly drunk, and then he falls on the ground, and then you go home. It's an escape. The whole idea of a bracer after work. What are you bracing for? To face the family. This is a different tradition, the German tradition. This is the America of the 6-day work week. This is their only chance for leisure. On the other hand, they drink on Sunday, the Sabbath.
In 1855, Chicagoans elected Dr. Levi Boone mayor on an anti-immigrant ticket. A descendant of Daniel Boone, Dr. Boone had been a city physician during the cholera epidemic, which he blamed on immigrants. As mayor, he banned drinking on Sundays, a slap at the Germans. To curb Irish drinking, he raised the license fee on saloons from $50 to $300. He allowed the native-born to enjoy their whiskey in private clubs.
Mayor Boone was afraid with the Irish saloons and the German beer gardens that these would be, and they were, meeting places for the workers. This was the time they talked politics, where they talked over their grievances against the city and what was going on. And so it wasn't just the outlawing of the beer, it was the outlawing of freedom of speech, their chances to get together.
On the day that violators of Mayor Boone's law were being tried, hundreds of Germans, joined by some Irish, ran across the bridges from their neighborhood north of the river and charged City Hall. The mayor ordered the swing bridges opened to keep a second wave from crossing the river. Germans caught on the bridges became sitting ducks for the police. The lager beer riot of 1855 was short-lived. So was the term of Mayor Levi Boone. For the rest of the 19th century, the Protestant elite would be hostile to the customs of immigrants. But no mayor ever succeeded in closing the saloons.
Our thanks to our Alderman Gene Schulter, without whom this festival would not have been possible. Give me much, behind the wall.
The native-born suffered the Germans. The Irish fared worse. In the election of 1860, anti-Irish sentiments reached a peak. Gurdon Hubbard ran for alderman in the 7th Ward. Vote for Hubbard and the whole Republican ticket, a handbill reminded voters. One more victory in the noble 7th, and the Celts will never peep again. A newspaper taunted, "Scratch a convict or a pauper, and the chances are that you tickle the skin of an Irish Catholic."
The Irish were the blacks of the time. The Irish were considered less than others. The Irish were known as lazy, as drunk, as promiscuous. Same thing said about African Americans for the years said about the Irish. And so the phrase very often in newspapers, "No Irish need apply."
No one wanted to live in an Irish neighborhood. Free blacks would move out of the neighborhood if the Irish moved in. I mean, they were the discriminated group in the city of Chicago, without any question.
The most strident anti-Irish newspaper in Chicago was the Tribune. Joseph Medill, a publisher from Cleveland, bought the Tribune in 1855 at the height of Irish immigration. He would become the city's most influential editor, the voice for the Protestant elite against the immigrants.
Later on, he says, you know what we ought to do with a lot of these immigrants, especially the ones who are impoverished and walking around the streets? Put strychnine in their food. He said, dress every Pole in Chicago with an Irishman. He said, hang them from them. He said, that's what we ought to do. And he's saying this stuff in public.
In 1870, Potter Palmer, at age 44, married the 21-year-old daughter of a real estate magnate from Louisville, Kentucky, Bertha Honoré. He first noticed her shopping with her mother in his Lake Street store when she was 13. She now said she would be satisfied to be the wife of an innkeeper. The inn was the Palmer House, an 8-story hotel nearing completion on State Street, the tallest building in the city, and with 225 rooms, one of the largest hotels in the country. Palmer billed it as the only fireproof hotel in America. He imported chandeliers and candelabra from France and staffed the hotel, he announced with pride, with several hundred smartly uniformed Negroes. The Palmer House was Potter Palmer's wedding gift to Bertha. They would make it their in-town residence.
Hotels were a symbol of urbanity in late 19th century America. And I think the Palmer House is one of a whole series of Chicago hotels that brought the city reputation. Reputation is spread by travelers quite a lot, and it's the public facilities of a city, the railroad stations, the hotels, that would supply a lot of the reputation that they spread.
The years after the Civil War were boom years. In 1871, more vessels arrived in Chicago than any other city in America. More than 270 lumber boats every 12 hours. Ships heading for Bridgeport passed 13 miles of docks and 24 swing bridges. As soon as the bridge closes, the impatient crowd rushes madly on, wrote journalist Noah Brooks, giving a stranger the impression that they are an active race, given to gymnastics and slightly crazed. In less than 40 years, Chicago had grown from a fur trading post to a metropolis of 300,000. In 1871, a popular writer called this growth one of the most amazing things in the history of civilization. The colony Joliet had foreseen had come to command the continent. By October of that year, Chicago had suffered one of the worst droughts in memory, only an inch of rain since July 4th. Every day for a week, the fire bell rang from the courthouse. The fire department was exhausted. On the evening of October 8th, a strong wind from the prairies blew across the forest of shanties and mills at the southwest corner of the city. Bertha Palmer looked out the window of her country estate and saw a lurid orange and yellow curtain hanging in the night sky. The fire started around 9 at night in the barn of Mrs. Catherine O'Leary, a 38-year-old woman who ran a dairy business. Within hours, a rumor spread that Mrs. O'Leary brought a lantern to the barn and a cow kicked it over. The fire tore through a block of shanties on the west side. Flaming timbers were blown toward the south branch of the river, at furniture factories and grain elevators. People began to panic. Wretched females implored spectators to help them with their burden of bedquilts, cane-bottomed chairs, and iron kettles, a reporter observed. all was confusion. Before midnight, the fire leapt over the south branch of the river and hit the gasworks. The Greasy River itself went up in flames.
If you examine the waterfront along the river, you had things like, 5 wooden buildings, a paint factory, a turpentine making plant, dry goods, throw in like 4 or 5 lumber yards. It was an accident waiting to happen.
This is a city that had been made out of the pine trees that had been cut in the North Woods. And so those trees now turned into buildings, sitting there in an arid landscape in a period of drought with high winds moving across the prairies. Yeah, there's something inevitable about a fire like that burning, and totally predictable.
The fire raced for the heart of the city, for the courthouse, where cascading sparks made it seem as if the city were hit by an illuminated snowstorm. A bell tolling to the end crashed through the ruins. It struck the Briggs Hotel, which George Pullman had jacked out of the mud. Marshall Field's sparkling marble store. Joseph Medill's Tribune building. Even the fireproof Palmer House. Within minutes, most of Chicago's landmark buildings were gone. The janitor at the Board of Trade saw it coming.
He took care of his family, then he rushed to the Board of Trade, to the vault, pulled out as many records as he could to save them, and he became one of the saviors of the Board of Trade.
A portrait of Frank Hudlin, the janitor, later adorned the board's Hall of Fame. Terrified crowds fled north toward the river.
There's a lot of curious things about the fire. You have these old wooden sidewalks. They're there to protect people from the mud. The leaves are underneath, and you have this wooden cover over there, and you have a wind coming underneath, which whipped the fire up very quickly. And so when the fire picks up, you have essentially an oven that's in the wooden sidewalks.
Bridges to the north side, cluttered by horses and wagons, became impassable. Burning wood was blown across the river and landed in a railroad car carrying kerosene.
The scariest thing about the fire was the wind that the fire created. Convection whirls, they were called. They spin and spin and spin, and you get this rising hot air and cool air going in there and creating a tornado effect. And then these tornadoes would come and they'd hit a building, and it would give them a spin, and they'd take the roof off a building and deposit it a quarter of a mile away. And that's how the fire spread.
A burning timber tore through the pump house roof. The fire spread in all directions, devouring 11 blocks in an hour. The McCormick Mansion was destroyed, along with the more modest homes of the Germans. The McCormicks camped on the prairie, a contemporary noted, next to the lowliest vagabond and the meanest harlot. The wind was like a tornado, and I held fast to my little ones, one woman remembered. I thought the day of judgment had come. She huddled in the emptied graves of a cemetery, being converted to Lincoln Park. Throughout the night, thousands remained trapped by the lake north of the river, near William Ogden's lumber yards. At dawn, the lumber yard burst into flames. Then Ogden's railroad, McCormick's reaper works. South of the river, the Illinois Central terminals. The sun disappeared. Such a scene of horror and terror, I cannot make you imagine, one woman trapped by the lake would write. The wind increased, Straw blew, feather beds and blankets blazed, and even the people were on fire. She told her husband she would rather he drown her than let her burn to death. The Chicago Fire of 1871 was one of the great urban catastrophes of modern times. More than 73 miles of streets and 17,000 buildings were destroyed. 100,000 people, 1/3 of the population, were homeless. 125 bodies were recovered. Many others were vaporized or drowned and never found. The investments of two founding fathers, William Butler Ogden and Gurdon Saltonstall Hubbard, were in ruins. Tribune editor Joseph Medill was undaunted.
It's saying to people outside of Chicago, keep sending your money. Don't call in your debts right now. You'll get your money back. And it's also saying to the people who live in Chicago, stay. Don't go to Iowa. Don't go to St. Louis. Don't go to Milwaukee. There'll be jobs here soon. There are already a lot of jobs.
Chicago boomers and boosters are on trains the next day going out to the East Coast saying, hey, this is a great place to invest. We're not broke. We just had a little fire.
In New York to buy new presses, the Tribune's publisher, William Bross, exhorted investors. Help establish Chicago on a scale more gigantic and more profitable than ever before, he bellowed. You will never again have such a chance to make money. The optimism didn't last. A month later, the editor of The Nation asked Frederick Law Olmsted in Chicago to build a park, to report on the devastation. For a time, men were unreasonably cheerful and hopeful, Olmsted wrote. Now this stage appears to have passed. No one could yet see, he added, how the city is to recover from this blow.
There's more about Chicago on American Experience Online. Take a Chicago Trivia Challenge, trace immigration to the Windy City, and follow a map of the fire's devastation. All this and more at PBS Online, pbs.org, America Online keyword PBS. American Experience is made possible by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to enhance public understanding of the role of technology. The foundation also seeks to portray the lives of the men and women engaged in scientific and technological pursuit.
Liberty Mutual Insurance is a proud supporter of the American Experience. And by helping people live safer, more secure lives, we're also proud supporters of the American dream.
At the Scotts Company, we help make gardens more beautiful, lawns greener, trees taller. If there's a better business to be in, please let us know.
Major funding for Chicago City of the Century provided by the Rauner Family Foundation, supporting the education and well-being of children in Chicago. And by the state of Illinois. Discover, indulge, explore, play, right here, right now in Illinois. American Experience is also made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. For more information on this topic, you can order the companion book, Chicago, City of the Century, by Donald L. Miller for $16.95 plus shipping and handling. Please call 1-800-255-9424.